Thank you for joining us. There we go. If Sydney or Octavia or anybody from Sandag, if you see hands raised or anything that I can't see because I'm sharing screen, that would be great. Just let me know, please. Thank you for the members who are here from the ATI advisory group, and for all the members of the public who are also here to hear the discussion that we have tonight for our September meeting of the group. Screen. So our guidelines for this meeting, if you have not been on one of our meetings before, is this is on Zoom so that it is being broadcast to the public, and we are being recorded. This will be posted to the ATI page of the Sandag website. Due to the focus of wanting to have the ATI advisory group members in attendance be able to share and discuss the project, they're the individuals who will be able to speak tonight. If there is a member of the public who would like to share comments, they can do that on the ATI page. They can email our address for the ATI study, and then we will be having 2 more community forums as well. If you are a member of the ATI advisory group, please raise your hand if you'd like to talk. We definitely want to have some good discussion here. And at our last meeting, we did unanimously, or you all unanimously nominated Darwin to be the chair of this this group. So I'm gonna speak up, but let him, I want to say, co-lead the meeting and facilitate the meeting and the discussion. So I'll keep moving the PowerPoint slides, but let him move us along as we need to make sure that we get the most out of this discussion. And again, we have a pretty healthy agenda again. We did move one topic to our next meeting in October, but we're hoping to get through as much as we can today, but also make sure that everyone has a chance to speak and share. So the goals before I hand it over on the first couple slides with for Darwin to talk about. We have a discussion of a recent study that came out, and I have some slides in there to help facilitate the discussion of San Diego areas hit hardest by mass incarceration. So we gave about 20 minutes to that. We gave about 10 minutes for Octavio and anybody who's on the working groups to share what they've been doing since our last meeting. We have an October meeting that is going to be held with the working group. So we wanted to offer an opportunity to talk about what you all would like to see on that agenda. We wanted to give you an update of where we are with the project timeline and upcoming task, our 3rd interim report that we're working on right now, an overview of our cost analysis study, and then hopefully have some time at the end also for some open sharing by advisory group members. So hopefully that sounds good to everybody. Any comments, Darwin, that you'd like to add before I move into that first item?
No.
Okay. So I tried to take some screenshots from this. This was a study that we did send out to the advisory group members, and it was where people in prison come from. It's a really interesting report online that shows different types of highest imprisonment rates. And we'll see if I go forward, if I can go back also. So what I included in the PowerPoint, Darwin, assuming that you'll help facilitate this conversation, is just some of those screenshots. And then some of the data, and I apologize that this is small. PowerPoint will also be on our website, is the community planning areas in the city of San Diego and what some of their incarceration rates were. So Darwin, you'd requested this, so I'll let you take it over if that sounds good.
Thank you. Actually, Layla's here, but she's quoted in the article, the segment that KPBS did on this. And so I actually would start by asking, there are other ATI members I want to jump in and talk about this that know about this work and are part of this. So I saw this in the press and it just jumped out. This, for opening up the discussion, I would just say what I saw connect to our work for alternatives to incarceration is the previous slide you had up with the arrest by zip code, yeah, and the numbers for the population suggest to me that one of the ways that we could not just deal with alternatives to incarceration, like reducing the amount of people that are arrested or finding alternatives, but also deal with the racial discrepancy. This, just looking at it, and again, I'll let others chime in, suggests to me there's definitely racial bias within this, and that could also be addressed through things like policy and setting up different practices for law enforcement. So that's my initial comments.
Did anybody else see the study or would like to comment on it? Sarah, could you know what would be helpful is Sydney, could you let us know who's on the call from the ATI, or could everyone introduce themselves just to see how many members we have here? I don't think Layla had joined when I started sharing my screen.
Yeah, no, Layla is not in the waiting room currently.
Okay. Does anybody else, Bill, Andrea, Latanya, anybody else want to share any thoughts on this? I see a raised hand. Could you go ahead? Sydney, do we have a raised hand?
Yes, I just asked them to unmute. I think they did. I think it's Manuel.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Cool. I actually appreciate this being brought up in this meeting. I hadn't seen this before, but looking at the numbers, you know, highest imprisonment rate per 100,000 population. You know, highest number that pops out is Barrio Logan, 734. Then, you know, we see, what is it? Encanto neighborhood, 654. What is it? Mid-City Heights area, 562. Ocean Beach, or no, wait, Old Town San Diego, 509. Yeah, and you know, these numbers, Mid-City Heights, 562, Mid-City Eastern, 369, Mid-City Kensington, 304, Mid-City Normal Heights, 365. And to me, like, you know, these are like among the most diverse communities in San Diego, where we have heavy policing, higher poverty rates, and less programs for our community, like less resources for our community. And to me, this, you know, I agree with what was said about racial bias. Like there's some, our community members see policing in the community that brings a lot of racial bias. So I think that's what this sparks to me, is that racial bias definitely has to be addressed. And we need to look at the makeup of our communities and the numbers. I also see Southeastern San Diego, 674, right? Highest numbers that pop up again. And you know, we lack resources. There's a lot of investment in public safety, but all that means is policing in our communities that criminalizes folks. That's my take and what I see here.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to share any thoughts on this? Bill?
Only if my unmute will work. Clicked it like 7 times. I agree with what was said previously, but also to me, this points out the need to make sure that the investments we're making in both alternatives to incarceration and better outcomes from justice involvement need to be geographically dispersed, because we know that people who increase their community ties and tend to have better outcomes. And we know that people who are released from incarceration tend to return to the communities in which they were raised or where they lived. And so this speaks to opportunities and the way that our county procures contracts to move away from sole source or single source providers and move towards partnerships, collaboration, and geographically dispersed services.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to add anything to this? Andrea?
Yeah, I think, and thank you for your comments, Bill. I agree with Darvin and Bill. And I also think that this is a very complex sort of piece of data that we're looking at here, because if you look at, for example, San Isidro, which, you know, is probably one of the most diverse neighborhoods, it has a relatively lower rate, right? So I would want to know, how does this originate? How does this originate out of different, you know, policing practices? Where are different neighborhoods where are PDs in different neighborhoods placing emphasis on policing? What are they, you know, what do they focus on? And I think that this is a very rich sort of data that we're looking at here. And I personally would like to know a little bit more about sort of the underlying other factors that come into how this data was generated.
Would this be something, and I'm kind of jumping ahead to the other agenda, we're having the joint meeting with the working group in October, and my staff asked them yesterday what they'd like to have on the agenda, and they said they really defer to what you all would like to talk about. Do you want us to, depending on how big that agenda is, do you want to maybe have any joint discussion on this? These data, because I feel like some of the questions are for them. I see Tanya's hands raised.
Yeah, I definitely would want to have further discussion on the data. I think this is a great jumping off point. There's still quite a lot in terms of drilling down on the data that might be revealed that could again inform our actual advisory board and where we go from here, and the suggestions or the things that we think maybe for future discussion. Yeah, this is great. I had not seen it before.
We'll make sure that we put a link to the website in the minutes that we post as well, and you can see the address too when we post the PowerPoint.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Do we want to move ahead, and we'll talk about including this?
Jerry Hall has his hand up.
For our advisory group members, I believe is Jerry a member of the public?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I appreciate the inputs on this. Maybe if we have time at the end and the advisory group wants to change the rules, but I just want to be consistent for everybody. Mr. Hall, if you are able to email any comments that you have to ATI study at Sandag, if we're unable to have you participate, we definitely would share your comments with the advisory group. Thank you, Andrea, for letting us know.
Let me also, I see Layla's on now, and Layla was featured in this article. It's curious, Layla, you want to comment?
Sure. It's definitely not surprising. This data has been consistent for decades of who's going to prison. So really what we're looking at is getting down into the weeds of why people from certain communities are going to prison in other communities. And we've really looked at that. One of the issues is racialized sentencing enhancements. If you'd like an example, one of them would be gang enhancements. A gang enhancement charged by a district attorney is going to take a misdemeanor and turn it into a prison sentence. So you have young people going to prison from our community for writing on a wall, which we don't want people to write on a wall, but we're not going to make a person better for sending them to prison for a misdemeanor that another person wouldn't be able to go to prison for. So we put a Public Records Request Act on gang enhancements in every county. And San Diego does not have one white person currently serving a prison term for a gang enhancement. And if we look at what is the definition of gangs, a lot of people fit that, and not just Black and brown folks. And so we have this racialized sentencing enhancement scheme. We also have something that really needs to be drilled upon. And when we look at our big three, it's murder, rape, and robbery. And it shows the disparities because most of the people on here who are doing prison sentences are in there for robbery, burglary. Burglary is not considered a violent crime, robbery is. And robbery is just based on what they define as force or fear. So you can have a kid who has a bag of chips and he runs out of the store and the guy tries to grab him and he pulls his arm, and that constitutes robbery because they'll say that was force. And that doesn't line up with murder. A person is dead, they're dead. There's no other ways of getting around murder. And because of these and how they're charged and who's charged with them and the poverty from some of the communities on how they're charging this, you have some serious disparities in sentencing. So if we really want to drill down to what we're doing and how we're doing it and the root causes, a lot of it is racialized and a lot of it is based on class. Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you, Layla. Thank you, Darwin, for letting me know that you joined. Anybody else? Okay, well then we'll work on the agenda and we'll get to that point where we can talk more about it, but then we could maybe have some discussions with the working group on this too to keep it going. But I think that was a good segue because I think this is one of the two working groups, and I know Octavio is gonna share now about what the working group status has been of going from 4 to 2 and what the two groups have been up to. Octavio?
Thank you very much, Cindy. Yes, hi everyone, members of the advisory group and members of the public joining us today. We have been having very fruitful conversations in the subgroups context, as you mentioned. As one of the results of one of these large advisory group meetings was to there was highlighted the need for a more in-depth discussion and much more engagement by the advisory group members into the project. So we proposed a series of subgroups meetings. We started with 4 groups, and eventually we condensed those into 2 large groups. One that is focused on looking on best practices and future research combined, and the other that's looking into disparities and law enforcement. Some of the summarizing some of the discussions is we have been first addressing or identifying some of the challenges and the needs initially, and the conversations have been moving forward to what are the next steps? What are the recommendations that most likely the working group would like to see or would like to make, or the things that the working group needs to be developing, the advisory group needs to be developing towards a collaborative piece that would come up along with a final report. We have been compiling some notes and sharing those notes with the members of the groups. And in the last 2 meetings, we've had major progress towards defining the contents of a final positioning or a final contribution by the advisory group. Of course, I'm not the main actor of this group, so I would like to give the voice to those who are actively participating in it and just like sharing with us some of the things you look forward to as a result of this fruitful conversation that we've been having.
Does anybody from one of the groups like to share anything from their discussions or anything with the public who might be attending or for the record?
I can go, or you want, I can start.
That'd be great, Darwin, and then I see Andrea's hands raised.
I can offer my contribution for the Disparities in Law Enforcement Working Group for our meeting. And there were 3 things that I recommended that we work on and we look at It's starting with for 3 areas for data collection that will help us in terms of developing concrete recommendations. So one was we just went over the arrest in jail time by zip code and getting even more data, as Layla said, getting more even into the weeds about why those numbers are spiked in certain communities and what can be done. Then the second one was arrest record by race, the RIPA data, and having access to that, getting at things like with the racial profiling and trying to see how that connects to things like arrest records and then also what we just saw, like connecting dots, like the amount of time that people spend in jail. So the RIPA data, I think, is really important. And then the third was, this was based on another KPBS article that I saw. Which individuals are arrested and the amount of times they're arrested. And what got me to think about this was KPBS did, they've been doing this as part of a series, but San Diego police arrest homeless people, but no convictions. And the article goes into detail about how a lot of the crimes that the on-house community are arrested for, that law enforcement arrests them for or cites them for, not prosecuted by the city attorney. And there's a huge discrepancy, which I thought of for us, for alternatives to incarceration, is that if there are, for example, someone in that on-house community that's getting arrested 50, 100, 200 times, and they're never prosecuted, then that might be a really good area for us to say alternatives to incarceration are not having them arrested in the first place, especially if the city attorney is on record as saying they're not going to prosecute those crimes. So that was another one I thought for our group that we should bring to the larger group, that we should dig in, get more data, and see what policy recommendations we can come up with.
Yeah, thank you, Darwin. Watana, want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think Andrea had her hand up first. I'm gonna.
Thank you. Thank you, Wetana. I took it down. I didn't want to leave it up all this time. Anyway, so I attended most of these meetings, and kind of what really stood out to me, in addition to what Darwin was sharing right now, is I think that many of us have this need or this wish to connect or be able to integrate our sort of micro level discussions or meso level discussions into sort of the broader, more abstract plans of the county, the various departments in the county, and the vision of our county leaders, to figure out how any of what we're discussing or suggesting at the end of the day is even considered feasible, if it's considered if it's deemed worthy being pursued. And so I'm really looking forward to this meeting in October, and I hope that we can have a dialogue, because we can, as an advisory group, we can spend all this time in meetings and talk about best practices and future research, et cetera, but if we don't have sort of even just a rudimentary understanding about how all of this can tie into sort of the San Diego County larger vision and planning for the future, I feel it's really difficult to tailor our recommendations in a way that's most helpful, if that makes sense. Thank you, Watana.
Of course. Mine is much shorter than yours, but just for the best practices future research group, doing some research and discussing with other jurisdictions across the country how they're approaching alternatives to incarceration. We'll bring that back to the next meeting, but and then Andrea and I have had a discussion about this. I've been able to speak to some folks who do this all over the country, and do this as a means of a third party assisting groups like ours. And again, having just some feedback from the county on whether these are things that are, like you said, feasible, or that are options that the last thing any of us wants to do is have a very large, and Sandag included, I'm sure, have a very large, robust report, series of reports that, you know, gets slotted into someone's files. It was a very motivated discussions in both of these two working groups about really having our recommendations be something that are actionable. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks. Charlene, I see your hand up.
Yes, basically what everyone is saying, I'm just going to make it very simple. The time that we are all investing with our experience and knowledge in this, is this going to actually make a difference? So I think what we want to know is what we're bringing to the table, is that going to be in line with the county? And if not, then redirect us to where they are envisioning this going or would like to see it go, so that we will all be on the same page. Because I do believe, you know, quite a few of us feel like there's a lot of time vested into this, but is this even going to make a difference?
Andrea?
Andrea, did you wanna, I see your
Yeah.
hand raised again.
So I'm trying to be in line here. So thank you, Ms. Charlene. And the thing I forgot to mention, and it was in our last meeting where this came up, our last subgroup meeting, is that there's also this feeling, I guess, for some of us that we're duplicating some of the work that's already being done in other groups, right? So you, for example, you've got the Community Corrections Partnership meeting, and if you've attended that meeting, or if you've ever attended that meeting, you will know that this group of individuals has been working on a community corrections plan for a long time, and since probably 2011, ever since AB 109 came down. And so it's kind of, how is our work any different from theirs? And of course, the CPP is only one group of people. You've got the police commission on police practices, you've got CLRB, you've got CAB, you've got various other groups and initiatives and action networks in the county that all seem to kind of be working on these issues. And it would be extremely helpful to understand whether there, A, is there sort of an overarching framework for all of this work, and B, if not, what can we do to make it a bit more, not a bit more, but actually a lot more integrated in the future?
Great, thank you. Manuel?
I just wanted to address something that Andrea mentioned, right? What is the difference between those groups and this group? I'm not familiar with all the groups. I have gone to one of the CCP meetings. And I think that, like, one of the biggest difference that I see is that the CPP and, you know, I'm assuming, or not this, the CCP, sorry, the CCP, not the CPP. The CCP is definitely like a group that's dominated by law enforcement. And we're not, right? We're mainly community-based folks that do work in the community, and we have a very different perspective. And I'm assuming that a lot of the other groups that are already established have a lot of, have a heavy like law enforcement voice. And I believe there has been, at least in the area that I focus on in the juvenile justice, there has been some work to make progress in San Diego, but there's a lot more needed. And we need more community-based solutions. And I think that a lot of the times our voices are not taken as seriously. And that's the big issue that I see.
Thank you.
I can jump in also.
Yes.
Let me just add, because I agree. I'm on the Juvenile Justice Commission for County of San Diego, and I've served on the Community Review Board on Police Practices for City of San Diego. So I've been a part of a lot of boards and commissions. And at a certain level, it's true. We're all doing engagements, stepping out on faith. At the end of the day, if we come up with recommendations, there's no guarantee that they'll be adopted, they'll be accepted, if they're voted on, if they'll pass. But I think it is a good exercise, as Manuel just said. We are community members. We've got a lot of folks that are on the front line dealing with these issues. and certainly have a perspective on this and what would help in terms of the community. And that to me distinguishes us from a lot of the other boards and commissions, especially ones that I've been a part of that are not just formal status in terms of law enforcement being on it, but also in terms of things like retired law enforcement and or also criminal justice people that work within the criminal justice system. So I think that's really important for what we're offering. And to me, that's sort of where I'd want to guide us in terms of what can we come up with in terms of representing the community that has not traditionally been heard, that would move us out of status quo and really address some of these entrenched systematic issues. And I think we can get the data, we can get the research, and we can come up with those proposals, those recommendations, and then just see how that goes. In that sense, have also faith in folks like the supervisor Lawson Rimmer that set this up and initiated this, that there's other people that are equally invested in this and want to see results come through. So in that sense, I think we're on the right track, and hopefully like what we're doing today will help us with that and being able to get to that point where we have really strong recommendations, things that can be adopted for policy and really move us out of the status quo. Thank you.
Thank you, Darwin. That was well said. Does anybody else want to add anything to any of the working groups before we keep moving? Just to follow up, we appreciate your time here. We had a lot of interest in this group. And as you know, you all were selected because of your experience, lived experience, work in the community. And we are committed to having you have a chance to have your own voice here with this report. And I know the Community Corrections Partnership is something that was part of the statute related to AB 109, as Andrea mentioned. And this was a group, the supervisors were committed to us getting community input, and we're trying to do that in the most transparent way that we can. So I appreciate what you said, Darwin, about having the faith that I can't promise you what's going to happen with everything, but I know that the current board is very supportive of hearing what we have here. And I think the combination of data with your voices is something that's going to be hopefully really good. That's what we're striving for. Okay, I'm going to keep moving. We're pretty much on track. Okay, so perfect segue for the October meeting with the working group. So what I'm hearing so far in terms of agenda is talking about what's feasible in terms of the work you're doing. Questions about related to how does what they've been doing relate to what you've been doing. Making sure there's no redundancy is something that was just mentioned. And there was, I had suggested sharing the potential data that we shared in that first item. But if we do bring that to discussion for the group, are there specific questions that you would like answered? So again, we want you to help craft this agenda. The working group wants it to be driven by you all. So that meeting is going to be whatever you'd like to have on it. So please don't hold back. So I have the what's feasible. How is what they're doing similar or different than what you're doing, redundancy, and then what questions from that data and anything else. Darwin, Anwell, Charlene, Andrea, Latanya.
Yeah, I would.
I'm scared. Did we get a report back from both working groups?
I thought that there were people who spoke from both of them, but if there's individuals who want to share more, I was just tracking it by individuals because there's people across both. Did we want to get any more? If I cut people off, I apologize.
I just want to make sure both working groups that she's time in. Thank you.
Okay.
I spoke a little for the best practices future research. I think is where I was going with some of my comments. But I would, and so following up on that, I would like to put forth a few of the best practices that have been researched. in the October meeting.
Okay, great. I got that. Bill, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to suggest the same thing. I think both of our subgroups on the advisory side should have a working discussion with the working group about our subgroup topics
Okay,
and kind of where we're going and things, because ultimately I think that each of our subgroups are going to, create some sort of an addendum or a, its own little report that'll be part of the larger report. And so we can get the input and best thinking from the working group in that October meeting and really make it a working meeting.
great. We'll follow up with you. I know the meeting's been scheduled, but we definitely want to make sure if there's materials you'd like us to share with the working group ahead of time. And then that PowerPoint or however that looks, we'll leave that up to you to how you want us to put it together for you.
I was thinking music video, but yeah, we'll go with PowerPoint. Okay.
Will you karaoke your results?
Interpretive dance came up, but yeah, we'll stick with PowerPoint.
Okay. Anybody else want to add anything else that we haven't already discussed, or I didn't try to summarize? Did you have any specific questions you wanted to try to get at? I guess it kind of it relates to, so we can work with individuals of the law enforcement disparity group talking about the data about over incarceration in some communities. Lila, did you have anything? And then Tanya, I see your hand up too. Okay, how about you go ahead with Tanya, and then if anybody else wants to go, they can.
Just on the data and in drilling down on some of that data, do you want us to email you all with things that we might, because I might think of some things after this meeting.
Oh, yeah, no, definitely. And before we publish the agenda, we'll let you know. I just want to make sure that they have a chance. Obviously, this wasn't a study the working group did, so I don't know if they'll have all the answers about the methodology, but if it's something that like you see a pattern there and the more we can give them a chance, because we do have some law enforcement on the working group to be able to be prepared to maybe respond to, if we were talking about what some of those planning areas were that had higher rates, or, why do we think San Ysidro didn't, and see, and talk about policing practices. But the more specific questions we have, I think it could lead to a more fruitful discussion.
Okay. So just to clarify, we can email you when that comes to me at midnight tonight.
Yes. Don't call, but you can email me.
Yeah, I will email.
Okay. Anybody else? I don't want to rush us
Yeah.
along. Yeah.
Let me just also add that I had shared with you, of course, request for us to have our own meeting time for ATI to be able to, for us to be able to process this. And I think it'll be also important with the working group, meeting with them, whether it's in October or some other point, that we have a chance to have our own discussion amongst ourselves to see how we're processing it and how that's going to impact direction and that we want to move in and the work that we want to do.
Okay, so we'll have a meeting, maybe try to work with you all to schedule a meeting or a week or two after that to process it. Is that?
And also just as a regular part of it, to the extent possible, for when we meet, like at our monthly meetings, having time either before or after the meeting where we can talk, and again, amongst ourselves about how we're processing this material and what we want to do. Part of it is, share this with you, was based on the feedback I was getting and what I was hearing from people about feeling like was overwhelmed, not clear about what was expected of us. So I thought that sort of thing, if we are able to meet by ourselves, might be able to address that and support each other.
Okay, so do you mean having like a separate meeting that would not include Sandag, that wouldn't be broadcast? Just so I make sure I'm understanding.
Yes. So, and we talked about it either before or after the meeting, where it would just be us for ATI that would be a part of it.
Okay. Okay, we'll follow up and talk with you about that. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. So just so you know where we are at, so I can't believe it's almost October. We are having our joint advisory group, working group meeting, and we did get a 3-month extension. That's why you see 6 months up there. We are going to be submitting a third interim report to the public safety group on October 15th. After that's reviewed, then we will be able to share it with you. And I have as an upcoming item, letting you know what's going to be in that report. And then we're working on goals 2, 3, and 4 that were in the original contract. And just to remind you what those were, goal 2 related to looking at people who had contact with law enforcement for either a public disorder offense or some type of substance use offense that was a misdemeanor during a period in COVID that did not end up in jail. And what we're doing is we're looking at 12 months prior to that, what was their contact across all the law enforcement agencies in the county, regardless if they were booked into jail or if it was just a field interview or it did end up in an arrest. And also 12 months after that contact, so that we can have a better understanding of what type of charges they might have. Is there a pattern to that? Can we add anything to the discussion? And this is something that we had talked with you about that had changed from the original scope, where they wanted us to have a comparison group, and it really was getting hard at figuring out where we were tracking. So we came at this as like, what people really wanted to know is when people weren't booked into jail for those type of offenses, what are the kind of contact are they having before? We'll look at the characteristics that we can about the individuals too, to see if there's any disparity. And then that contact afterwards, and seeing what type of contact they have. And what's unique about that analysis is we're taking our data from ARGIS, which has all the law enforcement data, and we're combining it with the data from the county about who's booked into jail and that processing through the system, which that merging and that linking hasn't been done before. So I think that kind of relates to one of the things, Darwin, you said that you're interested. So we're really excited to get that data. And I think that could almost be an entire meeting where we share that data with you and then talk about it once we have that available to share with you. The work goal number 3 relates to, and this was speaking about the disparities we saw in the community planning areas in terms, and Manuel, as you were talking about not having services in certain areas. We're doing that gap analysis, and that was informed partly by our survey that we did with the community. But we are compiling data, and I believe we had a meeting that Darwin and Bill were able to come on and chat with us, that follow-up meeting, because we didn't get to the needs assessment analysis. And I believe that I'm sharing some more information here, but broadly, we're looking at service needs, gaps, services, and then barriers. And I'm gonna make a plug for something coming up in a second. And then 4 is our cost analysis. And I'm gonna be talking a lot about that in the coming slides. So I'm not gonna go into that detail there, but those are our big 3 lifts that are coming up till the end of the project. Looking at contact in the system with individuals who weren't booked into jail, understanding needs, gaps, and barriers in terms of service, as well as best practices that we're working on, and then the cost analysis. So that's what we're going to be doing in October, November, December. And so you see that we have meeting with you all in the working group. In December, we're aiming to have a draft comprehensive report that's pulling everything together. In January, continuing to meet with you, having those 2 additional community forums, and we definitely want to talk with you all more about how we can potentially increase participation from what we had from the 4 that we had in the summer, and any outstanding work on those goals. We're scheduled to go back to the board in February and incorporate those changes to the report, and then the final report will be done in March. Any questions on that? Okay. So what's going to be in our third interim report? What we wanted to do is to share a section about what you all have been doing with the working group. And I know that Octavio has been taking notes of your discussions, but sharing the progress that's been made there. We've had changes to the methodologies and project components since we first did our preliminary design related to that cost 2, 3, and 4, the goals 2, 3, and 4. So we wanted to go through all our original research questions and let people know where we were in answering those and where methods had changed, again, for transparency. In terms of other data that hasn't been shared yet, we have some additional analysis that we'll share with you regarding jail time disparities and trying to understand what could we tie that back to that was related to goal 1, and also sharing information that we have on best practices that we've been doing as part of our work, and then the timeline for upcoming deliverables. So this third interim report is really just kind of giving the board an update of where we are and what we've been doing. Any questions?
Yeah, let me also just add, based on the work group in our several meetings, clearly racial disparities is one of the centerpieces that keeps coming up, recurring themes. And so what I was suggesting today, coming from our work group, is some different ways to get into that, like through the RIPA data and then the report about zip codes and arrest records and prison time. So one of the things in terms of the reports I'd like to see is how that data, that information is going to be processed and collected, included in it.
Okay. Well, we're not looking at RIPA data as part of this, so I think that was something that we could put as a recommendation. Is that what you're requesting?
I'm using RIPA data as an example of a way to get at racial bias with arrests and with stops. If there's other data, other ways to get into that, I'm open to it. But it seems really clear, again, it's coming from our work group, and then we've discussed this in our meetings, that is part of our alternatives to incarceration that we want to look at, is the racial bias and how it comes up with people that are stopped, how it comes up with things with sentencing, terms, and who's more likely to go to jail, those areas.
Okay, I hear you. Andrea?
Yeah, and in addition to what Darvin just shared, I would also like to encourage the group to think broader than just racial or ethnic disparities, but also think about the LGBTQIA+ community, think about individuals living with disabilities, as well as any other marginalized groups that may be disproportionately impacted by law enforcement and incarceration.
Right, and that's also why I included the part about the on-house community too. It's another example.
Thank you both. Did anybody else want to add to any of this discussion? No. Okay. So I don't have a slide on it. So before we get into the cost analysis, I want to make a plug for, we sent out the survey to you, to service providers. And so I do hope that you're sharing that. The background on that was when we were meeting with Bill and Darwin, we were talking about the barriers that we heard about from individuals who had been formerly incarcerated to getting services in the community. And I can't remember if it was Bill or Darwin, so I'm going to say Barwin or Dill. I'll combine you two, so I don't have my notes here, but it was doing a service provider survey. So this was something that was outside our scope, but we thought it was a really great idea to try to do something as quick and dirty as we can. So again, it's not the most scientifically rigorous. We put together a 4-question survey. Monkey and Charlene, we're hoping that you can send that out to the reentry roundtable. If you haven't, we asked the working group to distribute it, but it's asking service providers to share perceptions of barriers to their clients, but also barriers to providing services, which we thought was another key piece. Is it in terms of contracting, hiring staff, retaining staff? So again, the goal here is to provide actionable information to the Board of Supervisors in the county. So it's a quick survey to do, and if you could help us distribute that, I meant to include a slide here. So any questions on that or thoughts before we go into the cost analysis?
Happy to send it out.
Thank you. Okay, so the cost analysis. So this is the goal 4 of the study. And I want to be really clear up front that this part will not be doing what we all want it to be doing necessarily. The most effective study I think that can be done is when we do something called a cost effectiveness analysis. And we did an evaluation of the Sheriff's Department Veterans Moving Forward project, VMF, that's up at the Vista Jail. And as part of that study, we weren't able to randomly assign veterans who got the treatment and didn't, but we were able to come up with a comparable control group that did not get VMF services. And so we were able to track what was the cost of VMF versus not getting VMF. We were able to look at these actual individuals, and then we were able to look at recidivism to calculate out a couple years what was the cost of the program versus reduced incarceration rates. And we were able to show that VMF was a cost-effective program in terms of the cost invested resulted in fewer jail days and fewer costs to the system down the line. And that's unfortunately what we're not going to be doing here. And when I explain to you why, I hope it all makes sense, but I just want to make it really clear what the outcome of this data will be. So what we were asked to do as part of the project scope and is in our contract was to identify costs incurred by county agencies to deliver services to individuals. Booked for specific penal code offenses, or it could be any type of offenses during the sampling period. So this is going to be the same as goal 2. We're looking at some public intoxication, public disorder contacts, and public disorder conducts, and then also drug charges. And we were asked to look at the short and long-term cost and saving estimates in 1, 5, 10, and 20 years out. And we're going to talk to you about where we've gotten to working with the working group in terms of methodology, because we really need to get going with this since we only have a couple months more. Because we're not evaluating the services, we have 9 alternatives to incarceration that we're going to be studying. And this is, we don't know the effectiveness of those services because many of these services have not been rigorously evaluated. And we also don't know what they're going to look like in the future because obviously program fidelity can change over time. We're also not going to be able to look at non-budgetary costs of things that cost to outside the system. And then when we present the results, we just want to make it really clear that whenever you're doing any type of modeling or analysis or forecasting, the further out you go, the less accurate you're going to be because there's a lot of other factors that could be playing out. We may want to look at some interval estimates because when you say 1 point, you see confidence intervals when they talk about what percentage of people are going to vote for something because you get a higher level of confidence. And we're going to have to assume that everything's staying the same. We worked on a study a long time ago when juvenile arrest rates were higher than adult, just trying to look at like what was the population changes over time and what could the juvenile bed needs be, and talking about changing systems. We all know that there's a lot of alternatives to incarceration for juveniles now. So those forecasts were totally off because there was really a big shift and a lot of greater emphasis on finding alternatives to incarceration. So we just want to make it clear like the parameters of the study, and we'll be explaining that when we do the results. So this is what we're doing. We're taking a baseline group, and the baseline group is going to be individuals who were booked into jail for a misdemeanor level drug or public conduct offense between January 1st, 2018 and February 29th, 2020. So technically prior to the pandemic. And those are the 5 drug use and possession charges that the working group feels comfortable would be eligible for alternatives to detention. And then the 4 that would be the public conduct charges. What the working group felt most comfortable with was we are going to be if somebody had another charge other than one of these that are shown on the slide, they would not be in the sample. We're going to be looking at the individual level. So we're going to be considering if somebody came in more than once, how many days in jail did they serve for any of these offenses when they were booked just for those offenses. And then we're going to be calculating all the cost that the county incurred related to that, related to booking, incarceration, and then processing through the justice system. So we're going to have to be tracking them through the system, seeing the DA cost, potentially probation cost, public defender cost. So that's the baseline group. My concern with this is, so we will see if they had other offenses during that period. But theoretically, they may not have served that much time in jail just for these offenses. So this sounds simpler than it is because individuals might get other things added on. There might be a probation violation. So we're going to be really trying to be clear and transparent, but we want to be able to tell that full story about what's going on with the baseline group, people prior to COVID who got booked in, what were all their charges. Then we have alternatives, and you'll see that there's 8 listed here. We got feedback to include a 9th, which I'll share with you. So the alternatives are PC 1000, sobering centers, crisis stabilization units, mobile crisis response teams, probation pretrial release, behavioral health court, homeless court, the district attorney's CJI or Community Justice Initiative program, and residential treatment. And what we've added is also outpatient treatment. And what I'd like to make clear here is that there's a lot of variation in what these are. Sobering center is, going in and staying somewhere for 4 hours. A residential treatment is going to be a lot more costly. But these were what the working group was most interested in, thought could be the alternatives. We're going with alternatives that exist right now because we need to compile data for these alternatives for what would be the cost for an average participant, how long is an average participant engaged. And we were trying to think about, and this is where the individual is complex. Somebody could go to multiple of these, and we're acknowledging that, but we don't know the whole trajectory of everybody. And there might be somebody who has one type of offense that wouldn't get this alternative. So what we're going to be doing is trying to say, what would be the cost per person of each of these? So we're going to compare PC 1000, assuming the baseline group had all gotten PC 1000, what would be the cost of the system? If the baseline group had all gotten sobering centers, what would be the cost of the system instead of jail? So those will be the comparisons done. And again, as I said up there, we know that in real life, this is fake, that it's not going to be it, but knowing, since we don't have something that's in real time, that we could say this group is getting this group is getting this, and this is what actually happened, we have to make a lot of assumptions. So that's the methodology we have there. And I just want to acknowledge that we have a lot of assumptions here and clarity, and it's messy, and it's not going to be as useful as we wish it could be because it's all so hypothetical. Manuel.
I guess I kind of have like a 2-part question comment. Starting with like the focus on like misdemeanor level drug or public conduct offenses. I guess what I say, like, wouldn't that kind of be limiting our scope of what we're like looking at and what we could potentially do, right? And when we think about like the change that we could potentially like envision, right? And work towards. And then my second question is, you mentioned there was like a committee that that like worked on this. Who was that committee?
Okay, so the committee they didn't inform the methodology in the sense of like how to do a cost study, but it's the working group that you're meeting with next month. So it's the individuals who are from the county-based organizations who could talk with us about what the different alternatives are and their knowledge of the system. In terms of those charges, Andrea, I don't know if you want to speak to it. Andrea from Public Safety Group is on. Those were the offenses that all of the stakeholders from the public defender to the DA were willing to consider right now at this point in time. Those agencies are willing to consider as alternatives to incarceration. So that was the direction that we were given of what offenses to include there. Andrea, did you want to add anything? And I don't know if Cesar or Sydney, could you promote Andrea?
And Lila,
I see Layla's hand is raised too. Andrea, did someone promote Andrea?
she's here.
I just did, yep.
Okay,
Might take a minute, yep.
okay, and Layla, we'll go right after Andrea has a chance to answer anything else about the charges from her work with the county.
Hi, Cindy.
And
No, and you what you said is accurate. These are the charges that the justice partners, justice and health, well, I would say primarily, yeah, the justice partners came to an agreement on that they were willing to look at in terms of this aspect of the study. And for the most part, a lot of the alternatives, the board letter also somewhat dictates low-level misdemeanors, although it says, I believe also says not limited to, but the focus was on low-level misdemeanors. And these are the specific misdemeanors that the working group was able to agree on.
thanks. I just want to make sure I wasn't missing anything there.
And Cindy, just one other thing from the list that you previously showed. There was also one other change. It would be as far as probation pretrial, it should actually be sheriff pretrial, because the period of time in which you're studying, there was no probation pretrial. It was the sheriff's pretrial. So just it's somewhat minor, but I think it does matter because probation's pretrial program is going to be different and is on the way to being different than the sheriff's pretrial program. So I just wanted to sort of add that in.
Okay, we can talk more about that because I want to, obviously, if there's no probation, if there's no sheriff pretrial in the future, but we can try to figure out what probation would look like in the cost data, but is there still sheriff pretrial or no?
The sheriff does the assessment for pretrial, and then those who are granted OR, SOR, lower bail are part of that pretrial group. And that they would be potentially supervised, primarily the supervised own recognizance folks are supervised by probation rather than the sheriff.
Okay. Thanks. Layla, I see your hand raised.
Yes, two things. One has to do with the populations we'll be looking at. I would be interested in seeing the number of people who bail out, whose bail is $100,000 or less, because that's not a public safety issue. They're bailing out. And so why do we, and a lot of times families have to pull this money, and it hurts with rent, mortgage, car payments, food security. So if we could do any work around there, I just like to see the percentage, because if those people are getting out anyway, and they're just having to pay, that's not an impact on public safety. The second part is I'm interested, and also if we have any economic indicators with that percentage, because of course we know poor people tend to languish in jail longer, and they shouldn't be there just because of their lack of ability to pay. And it's a Supreme Court precedent called Humphrey that the case law is very clear on that. So the second thing I'm interested in looking at is not just looking at the usual players in these pretrial services and different things, but community and communities work on decreasing recidivism and increasing court show up. And that would be through community advocacy and court support programs, and potentially releasing folks to them who then help them show up to court, help them with resources that are not so much involved in that law enforcement kind of punitive measures for people that have not been convicted.
is there, so for the first one, I don't think we'd be able to look at that as part of the cost study, just because we're looking at people who weren't booked into jail, so bail wouldn't have been an issue. And I'm not sure if bail amount is something that we have access to, but I will get back to you on that one. For another community program, we were really focused on those costs to the county per the direction. But I think it is interesting thinking about what other programs there might be. Is there a community program like that you're talking about? Because we need to really quantify costs associated with it to do the comparison. So it can't be something that's a hypothetical. Is there anything that you know off the top of your head?
Definitely. I know Los Angeles has been doing some work about that. Let me see if I can post some research and send it to you. Community-based organizations during pre-release, and also participatory debug with Silicon Valley Debug, participatory defense. And it's a national organization. They have hubs nationally, but the foundational organization is Silicon Valley Debug. And they do pre-release services in San Jose.
Okay, you know what I'm going to do is Sarah, who works with us, who's doing the best practice research. Are you okay if she reaches out to you after the meeting just to follow up with you on some of those?
Definitely.
Okay, thank you, Layla. Did anybody else have any other questions or comments about what we're going to be doing before we start sharing data with you? Okay, if not, this is your time. Open sharing, and we can go back to any of the other items, but the next 22 minutes is for whatever you'd like to talk about. Any questions for us? It's your time.
We'll also open it up to the attendees, see if there's also anything that they want to offer.
Definitely. If there's an attendee who would like to raise their hand, we can remote you to we can let you speak if that's so wished. I'm going to stop sharing just because this is the last one, just so I can help see.
Jerry Hall, your hand is up and you have been given the permission to talk, so you're good to go.
Oh, tremendous. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate your work. I just had a few items that I'll try to summarize quickly. The last item is pretty concerning because I think it's remarkable that the county working group of justice partners provided you a list of misdemeanors that they're willing to consider in the ATI program. And I think that that in itself is concerning because it really puts you in a corral of sorts of recommendations that you might be able to make based on the cost analysis once you see that. Second is seeing the slide without of the 100,000 population and the percentage of people that are in prison is concerning as well. And without knowing the prosecution rate, the number of cases pursued by the DA's office, how many were offered pleas, how many were offered diversionary opportunities into treatment. That would all be important data to have. Also, the community of Pacific Beach, for instance, where I lived for 25 years and did a lot of work in crime data, PB is traditionally one of the top 3 communities with the highest levels of violent crime. So it's North Park, downtown, and Pacific Beach. Yet it shows a significantly low level of people are being incarcerated. So this is one of the reasons why I believe that a wider scope of crime should be looked at, and then especially the DA's work, because people that are coming out of Southeast, for instance, might have higher prosecution rates and lesser opportunities for pleas. Finally, without viewing and understanding police in-service time or the number of officers that are on patrol in communities, really doesn't give you a really good snapshot of what's going on. So if there's 100 police officers working in the Southeast District or the Southern District, and there's 50 officers working in the Northern District, you're going to have a big disparity in the number of arrests and citations within those areas. So I encourage you to get the in-service time of the police department in each of the communities when you're looking at this data, because it'll help you understand more about the opportunities that are made available to police to basically stop and cite people. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Would anybody else like to share? I know we haven't been able to hear from some of our advisory group members. Betsy, I see you're on. Jackie, Lon. Anybody else?
Yeah, let me also just add real quick, following what was just shared with us, I think it's really important. And I know I've talked with Layla and others about this. I think so the way the policing works, like especially in certain neighborhoods in the Southeast, it is part of the thing I'm realizing is that if you haven't experienced it or seen it, then in some respects it might be hard to appreciate it. So let me just say this. When I was on the community review board and police practice for San Diego, I did ride-alongs. And one of the ride-alongs I did was with the gang unit on a Friday. They were called the gang unit on a Friday night. And the thing that was really apparent is the amount of different law enforcement entities that were working in those neighborhoods. There was also the curfew unit that was supposed to be for the city, but really works out of Southeast Division. There was regular patrol cars. There was community policing. So it's very clear, you get a very clear sense of the law enforcement presence in the community, unlike other neighborhoods. And again, following what Jerry was just saying, it makes sense if you have that many law enforcement agencies and different groups working there, that you're going to have more arrests in those neighborhoods. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's more crime in that neighborhood. It does mean that there are decisions made about where law enforcement's deployed and then where they're more likely to make stops and arrest. So I just want to add that this hopefully is like a background why I've been pushing for the racial profiling and the racial element for arrest and sentencing to be included in our work. Maybe that helps too.
Thank you. Jackie, I'd seen you turned your camera on. I don't want to put you on the spot, but did you want to share anything? It's nice to see you.
No, I'm just listening. I disagree with a lot of things you guys are doing, but I'm just listening. I'm out there. I'm on the grind. I see what they're doing. I see how they arrest people. I know it's a racial thing. I already know that. All those charges that you had up there, most of those are what the women are going in there for, or prostitution. You didn't have prostitution up there. They're doing prostitution to make sure the man is not sick, and they the ones sick because they can't get no dope. I mean, that's the real thing I see. And I know some of the stuff you're doing is to provide the information to the board members, but the real thing is that they're arresting Black domestics, okay? And they're arresting women. I had a lady last week that got her job working every day, got her baby back from CPS, and then here come a warrant. They arrested her. So guess what? They took her baby, she lost her job. Those are the things nobody sees. And that's what kind of frustrates me. But I know you guys got to do numbers and show numbers and all that, but I'm looking at lives, not numbers. So maybe I'm just listening, y'all. I ain't got nothing to say, but that little comment right there, that's, but that's just my thoughts, okay? That's my thing.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up with you, Jackie, just to talk with you more again. We talked about trying to share stories and make clear that it's not numbers. I don't want to take advantage of anybody's personal story, but I think this is where your direct feedback from the advisory group is so important to add the numbers that we're putting together, because we're not on the street, honestly. So I appreciate your perspective on what we're sharing more than you know. Lon, I see your hand up.
Yeah. Thank you, Jackie, for that. I want to speak on the difference of the policing in the communities. I lived in Southeast before. I stayed in City Heights, and I've also lived in Claremont, and now I currently reside in Santee. And I want to speak on the difference of the policing. Okay, when I was living in Southeast in City Heights, I didn't go a month without either being tailed by law enforcement or being pulled over for minor things, as far as like my tires being bald or tinted windows. And after the initial stop, I'm asked to get out of my vehicle, and so they could search my vehicle. Now, I'm in the same type of vehicle. I drive the same type of vehicle. I look the same now that I did when I was living in Southeast and City Heights. But now I live while I was living in Claremont, and now that I live in Santee, I don't get those type of stops, or I don't get, I've never been tailed since I've been living in Santee. I've never been pulled over or been asked to step out my vehicle. The sheriff's department out here never looked at me like don't even glance at me when I drive past them in this area, and Claremont either. I've never been looked at. I've never been stopped or asked to leave, get out of my vehicle in those two communities or in those two areas I lived in. And the only difference I see is Claremont and Santee. You already know the majority of the population that resides in those areas versus City Heights and Southeast. So I'm speaking from experience of how the policing works. So there's a difference in policing in different communities.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Welcome.
Oh. Amanda, I see you're on with the supervisor's office.
Hi, Cindy. Thank you. This is Amanda Berry from Supervisor Lawson Reamer's office. I thought since you all have a few minutes, I would just raise my hand and come off mute and thank you all for your time on this project. I know you all are volunteering your time. And I want to just underscore, there was a question earlier about what this all will result in. And I will say that Supervisor Lawson Reamer authored the initial board letter and brought this forward, not so that it would just sit in a file drawer or on a shelf, but that there actually will be recommendations that come back and are actionable by the board. And I'm happy to talk with any of the advisory group members or members of the public if you're interested in connecting directly with our office or the original intent from the supervisor, because she is very passionate about this. And I think provided some pretty detailed recommendations in the initial board letter. And I just want to thank Sandag and all of the members of the advisory group for putting in the time and volunteering to get us really actionable things that the board can vote on to shape the way San Diego responds.
Thank you, Amanda. Does anybody want to have any other questions since Amanda has the mic, or any questions for her, for the county that you might be able to respond to? Latanya?
Thanks. I don't know that Amanda, hi Amanda, I don't know that you can respond to this, but I just wanted to clarify that, and I won't speak on behalf of the entire group, but for me, the cost analysis that Sandag is going to do based on the recommendations from a group that is not this group seems, well, it seems less than what I would have expected when we are considering the costs of alternatives to incarceration. And so knowing that really quite good information, knowing what a certain group is interested in agreeing to without knowing what this group is interested in. I think I will say that I definitely am looking forward to a more robust and expansive number of alternatives to incarceration, not just based on what we've looked at in terms of substance abuse and or use and public conduct. Thanks.
Andrea, I don't know if we can speak to this at all. So I want to, be 100% transparent with everybody. I totally hear you. And what you just shared, Jackie, about like prostitution as a charge. Also, we need to be very specific about like the charges we're looking at to be able to sample. And when we had the working group discussions, it was looking on what the different systems, again, at this point in time, we're looking toward. I don't know if I want to give equal weight to the working group and the advisory group and what we're looking at when it's within the scope, obviously, because we do have things that are deliverables to the county, but this is something we do have input over. I can, by the time the October meeting comes, we need to get going on this. So it's not something that can really wait, but I guess, Andrea, I feel like it was that direction, but I feel like the ATI is pretty unanimous in wanting to see more charges here. So I don't want them to feel like their time is wasted. So I don't know what our options are for expanding that or how we could potentially look at a broader sample. And then if we distinguish between the different ones, and then I guess my question for this group, if we had to be specific about what other ones you would like to consider in case we can bring that back to figure out how do we move forward so people feel like, again, within the scope, we're doing what we can, but it's more helpful. And I see two hands raised. I just didn't want to do something that then how you all have been saying, you don't want your effort wasted. That's why we were focused on the charges that at this point in time, they were most open to. So Bill, Layla, and then anybody else.
Thanks, Cindy. I feel like it's worth saying that the scope of work that was set out for Sandec to complete kind of assumes that there are systems, processes, and the resulting data that will answer the research questions. And I think we all know that there aren't really systems and processes in an integrated way to answer a lot of these research questions. And so the cost analysis in the limitations, as we've just discussed, is an accommodation of the limits of available data and some other factors that I think it's worth noting that like the research questions are ambitious in their scope of using data to understand something that really emerged and wasn't really designed to be measured and managed as a comprehensive system. And so in some sense, I think we ought to give ourselves permission to say that the emperor has no clothes on in terms of the data that we're using for analysis and what the working group is able to provide and stand behind because of the limitations of systematic integrated practices. We ought to just say it out loud.
Thank you. Layla, and then Andrea. Layla, you're still on mute if you're talking. She's doing are you doing?
There we go.
There you go.
Yes. I would definitely like to broaden the conviction, not the convictions, the arrest we're looking at. I don't know how to give you the best answer because I would do it by bail amounts. Because bail amounts, those schedules are set based on what they perceive as public safety. And so, and then of course we could remove some like sex crimes and stuff like that because I don't know how ready we'd be for something like that. But I'm open to hear what other folks say about that. Just being in there, bailing, having a bail fund, bailing people out, having a participatory defense hub, doing court support, anything $100,000 or less should be looked at.
Thank you. Andrea?
Thanks, Cindy. I just wanted to, you kind of asked me a question, so I just wanted to respond that there have been several conversations back and forth about the charges to include. And as I said previously, this is what the justice partners could all agree on, and there has to be agreement amongst all of them. If the advisory group would like to put together other charges that they would like to see considered, certainly that can be a discussion point if they'd like to talk with the working group. I guess I think about the question that was asked or comment that was made earlier about, what are they working group envisioning and how can these two groups be aligned? So I totally understand maybe the frustration that's felt about, the charges that have been chosen and that there's not greater more charges or ones of greater nature. But again, every agency has to act on its own behalf and what they believe is the right thing to do, and the right thing to look at, and what they're also willing to discuss as far as diversion goes, or as far as, that's really been the main focus. So certainly this group can, if there's additional charges they would like to come up with to discuss. I would just say, though, that the working group has been fairly steadfast in these charges for several months. So I just want to say that, I guess, because I don't, I'm just trying to be, I guess, as realistic and honest as possible. I don't think it's a waste of time. I think it's important for the working group to hear from the advisory group, but I'm not sure how much will be added after that conversation, but I think it would be a good one to have. So I just wanted to say that.
I know there's a member of the public that has their hand raised, and I also know that we have some other members, but I just wanted to share as we're talking about this, because as I indicated, we really don't have the luxury of time of waiting on this unless we get another extension, because it's going to take a lot to compile all this data. So I just wanted to share, this is from our most recent arrest report, so you could see what misdemeanor offenses there are. These are broad categorizations, and we'd actually need to get it at penal codes or other types of offense codes. But you can see that we have in 2019, there was 5,000 arrests for misdemeanor assault and battery. There was petty theft and burglary. There was 3,000 of those in 2019 and 2020. Just as you're thinking about other types of offenses, we already do have drug offenses that are included, but you could see how the categorizations are there. There are weapon offenses at the misdemeanor level. There are only 211 in 2019. And then in terms of this other category, which is very large, you can see there's sex-related prostitution. We have the disturbing the peace, hit and run. There's different city ordinances, failure to appear, other misdemeanors, selected traffic. So I just wanted to share that in case that triggered any thoughts as we further this discussion. So I'm going to stop sharing, but we can share that link to that report if you haven't seen it before. But thank you, Andrew, for sharing the input. I'd like to give a chance for the working group to hear the feedback of the advisory group and make sure that at least their voices are heard. If we can't change the research design, but at least that their disagreement on what's included is definitely noted, at the very least, if not taken into account. Manuel?
For myself, that's why I asked who was this working group, because it's the same thing that we see in juvenile justice. A lot of times, the folks at the table that come from law enforcement agencies are not willing to really be open to broader alternatives, to more community-based solutions, and to look at cases past low-level offenses. And the reality is that, you know, we have to think that the carceral system is not a system that is set up to really rehabilitate people. At the end of the day, like a lot of the folks that I've met in this process, you know, were impacted as youth, and they continued on that trajectory as adults because the system was set up to make them fail. And for me, it's pretty upsetting that as community members, you know, we were asked to be like, you know, we all volunteered to be here, but the county's calling, you know, called for folks to volunteer to be part of this panel. But this working group is making decisions that impacts the work that we're doing without us having a say in really how that's shaped. And to me, that's a big issue. The fact that we're asked to bring our voices to the table, but we're not really given the voice in some of the aspects of the work that we're doing. And for me, that's kind of like just reproducing the status quo of, you know, keeping voices out of the table. And I agree with what has been shared by other folks that have spoken before about how to expand. I definitely agree, you know, looking at bail amounts and looking at other offenses. So I appreciate you sharing the list. And so I hope that we can continue discussing this further.
Yeah, the challenges again with just the bail amounts, just again, as these are, our sample is going to be people who weren't in jail, so we won't have a bail amount for them. So that's why we need to focus on the charges. So I guess I would just like to add, if anybody from the advisory group, you should have my email, can reach out and let me know what you'd like us to share by the end of the week. What other type of charges? We heard from Jackie about prostitution, that she's saying that people are brought in for, but if there's something else specific.
Also, if I can just add, and I also got to drop off. I got another meeting at 6. Man, I agree with what you said. What I was making reference to before about stepping out on faith is at a certain level is trusting, and since this was really initiated by Supervisor Tara Lawson-Raymer, that she wants our input and that we've got at least one person that'll be an advocate for at the end of the day, our work product, what we come up with. And I think it's also safe to say, I don't think it's a stretch to say that if the working group, if it was producing what they wanted and the reforms that we needed, then we would never have come into existence. So in that sense, I trust that our voice is needed and wanted, and that there's a certain amount of elected officials, at least in that sense, that will buy into what we're doing. I think it's also safe to say, I put on my other hat as a criminologist, there's a lot of things that San Diego should and could be doing that we're not compared to other cities in terms of reform. So I don't know, in that sense of the problems with the working group or law enforcement or all of it, but there's a lot of reform work. A lot of the stuff we're discussing is already being done by other cities. So I think that we, in that sense, we're moving in the right direction, and we certainly are going to be helping San Diego in that respect. If it's easier to come from us to get these reforms through, I think at the end of the day, that's great. We can contribute to that because certainly there's alternatives to incarceration that are being policies and reforms that are being done all over the country now. Thank you.
Thank you. We are a little bit over, unless anybody who's a advisory group members has anything to say in closing. I want to be respectful of your time. I think this was a really good discussion. If you could please email me by the end of the week about what any other charges you would have, and we'll also be maybe adding this, sharing this with the working group, coming back to you so it's not just left hanging. And also have this discussion about different weights and perspectives, because I don't want you to think that your voices aren't being heard, because they are. And that sounded really cheesy. And if you saw my face, hopefully in person, you would know it wasn't meant to be cheesy. But thank you. I appreciate you doing everything that you're doing. And if you want to talk one-on-one with me or Octavio, please let us know. Okay, we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.